The Mario and Luigi games are full of some of the strangest enemies Nintendo's ever made, creatures you fought once, barely remember by name, and never saw again. So today I'm going game by game, breaking down the most bizarre and forgotten non-boss enemies in the entire series. Superstar Saga is the perfect place to start because it isn't even set in the Mushroom Kingdom most of the time. Instead, Mario and Luigi are sent to the Beanbean Kingdom, which basically gave the developers permission to invent whenever they wanted, and they absolutely took advantage of that. Beanies are the obvious starting point. They're essentially the Beanbean Kingdom's Goomba equivalent, except instead of a brown mushroom guy, it's a tiny bean-shaped creature wearing a leaf. They're simple, they're cute, and they only exist here. And then there's also Gold Beanies, the rare flex version that shows up like a shiny Pokemon and immediately tries to run away before you can cash in. These little guys are completely abandoned outside of Superstar Saga, and it makes them feel weirdly nostalgic. Superstar Saga then immediately hits you with the Bean Pun enemy assembly line. Sharpie is a spiky bean creature, Swarm is this odd little bug swarm situation, Lakopy is the Beanbean Kingdom's Lakitu equivalent, and Troupia and Paratroupia are basically Beanbean Koopas. This game is not subtle about it, like they really want you to know you're in the Beanbean Kingdom. And because those designs are so specific to this kingdom, they've become forgotten cousins of familiar Mario enemies. Of course, if you're going to have beanies, you're also going to have flying beanies. Power beanies are exactly what they sound like, beanies with wings. And that's honestly why they're so forgettable. They don't have a flashy gimmick or wild design, they just hover there, existing solely to make fights slightly more annoying. But that's kind of the point. Superstar Saga loved creating entire enemy species out of the smallest possible variation. Then there's the Beanerang Bro, which is the Beanbean Kingdom's take on a Boomerang Bro, and this one honestly feels like a missed opportunity. It's such a clear regional variant, a bro enemy that actually fits the Beanbean aesthetic, and yet it never comes back. No later Mario RPG ever revisits this idea. It exists here, and just throws bean-based projectiles at you, and just disappears forever. That makes sense because no other Mario and Luigi game is as obsessed with beans as Superstar Saga. And then if these guys weren't enough, Superstar Saga also introduces Chomp Bros. Yeah, bros based around chain chomps. It's such an aggressively Mario and Luigi idea that it's surprising it never returned. If you want enemies that feel like the developers were just having fun, Chucklehuck Woods is where Superstar Saga really shines. Chuck guys feel like Shy Guy's chaotic force relatives who've been drinking Chocola Cola since early morning. They look like the type of enemies who would challenge you to a fight and then immediately trip over themselves. Then there's Fuzzbush, which raises the eternal Mario RPG question, why is this bush alive and hostile? It fits the area perfectly and will almost certainly never be revived again because it's so specifically tied to this one soda-addicted forest. Pest Notes are one of those enemies that you almost definitely remember fighting but probably don't remember by name. They're living nuts whose entire purpose is to be annoying. There's no lore here, no major gimmick, it's just weird little creatures that exist because Superstar Saga was committed to making the Beanbean Kingdom feel uncomfortable in the best way. Oho Oasis gives us the Ohojis, which are the kind of enemies that sound fake when you describe them. They're small, round creatures that just stare at you until you attack them and then turn into elemental enemies. They're very strange, and some people may see them as memorable, some people may have forgotten them, but honestly they are kind of easy to forget if you have not played the game recently. I always like their design though, it reminds me of Pokemon. Then you hit Woohoo University, where Superstar Saga leans fully into Mario and Luigi, and this is one of my favorite parts of the game. There's Laser Sniffets, which upgrade an already weird enemy into literal laser turzets. Yo-Bros are turtles attacking you with yo-yos, and I mean, come on, that's a classic. And then the game casually drops viruses from Dr. Mario into the enemy roster. It's such a random crossover that you could tell someone on the dev team really wanted to happen, and it's small things like this that just give this game so much personality that we lost in some future games. And then Woohoo University doesn't stop. There's Mecha Chomps, there's Mecha Bloopers, and they're just robotic versions of characters we already know from the Mario universe. Really does help give this area a more sci-fi feel. Tunoombas are another character that's not entirely original, but combines two ideas and makes it original. Basically takes a Goomba, gives it a Tanuki tail, and then makes it a shape-shifting trickster that disguises it as helpful objects. It's one of the clearest examples of the series experimenting with enemy gimmicks. If Superstar Saga wasn't clear enough about how it loves heavily themed enemies, in Teehee Valley the game just decides to combine boos with Anubis imagery and gives us Anubus, which sounds very similar to something else you may know. It works shockingly well, and it's also something Mario will probably never do again, which you're going to hear me say a bunch of times. Alongside them are Gritty Goombas, which are just desert Goombas that pop out of the sand and have just enough personality to be memorable. Later on, Jokesense starts leaning into prank logic. Limbo Bros are Hammer Bros that literally just do limbo, which is like, okay, that's a thing now. And Hourglass is a living hourglass enemy that exists entirely because of a pun. Just peak design there. Then there's Time Bombs, which feel like they were invented entirely because someone wrote time plus bomb on a whiteboard and everyone just thought it was a good idea. They're just bombs with an even heavier focus on timing, and they only exist here. To my knowledge, they don't exist in any other Mario games, which is surprising because unlike a lot of these which are just very clearly meant to be in one place, like these feel like they could be in other games. And the last enemies I want to talk about for Superstar Saga are a set of water-based enemies: puffer cheeps, sand cheeps, shark bones, malabits, and they're just for the aquatic sections of this game. Most people probably barely remember their names, but their presence reinforces just how much enemy variety this game had. If you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to subscribe. I have other videos going over the bizarre and forgotten enemies of Mario and Luigi and Super Mario RPG, so I think if you like this, you should check that out after. So now on to the next game in the series, which is one of my personal favorites. Partners in Time, of course, had the Shroobs, and that's going to be a lot of the unique enemies here. Of course, the Shroobs are aliens, so Nintendo really doubled down on that theme. And like with Superstar Saga, since this game is heavily themed, it makes sense why a lot of these bad guys didn't come back. The backbone of the entire game is the Shroob species, and it's still wild that Nintendo created a fully original alien race for a Mario RPG and then immediately buried it. Shrooblets are the basic enemies you fight most often, and they already feel wrong compared to normal Mario enemies. They don't bounce, they don't waddle, they just glare at you. They're aggressive and kind of hostile in a way Goombas never feel like. Even their animations just feel more violent. What makes them especially memorable is just the context. Because remember, they're not just regular enemies, they're invaders actively occupying the Mushroom Kingdom's past. And of course, besides Shrooblets, there are just Shroobs, which are the normal version you're going to be fighting a lot. And it doesn't stop there, because it builds on an actual Shroob hierarchy, and one of the funniest examples is the intern Shroob. The fact that Nintendo went out of its way to imply that Shroops have entry-level positions is just incredible. These enemies sell the idea that this invasion has structure, organization, and probably a lot of paperwork too. These aren't the most threatening Shroops there are, but it makes them feel like more of a real society than just monsters. And there's quite a lot of variants I want to go over. There's Guardian Shroops, which feel like elite soldiers. They're heavily armored, aggressive, and feel more like real threats. Blazing Shroops are literally on fire and reinforce how alien and hostile this species is. Support Shroops exist purely to buff other enemies, which makes battles feel more tactical and less jump on things until it dies. But the standout here is Dr. Shroob. He's disturbing by Mario standards. He's an alien scientist experimenting on captured toads in a factory setting. I honestly forgot if he's considered a boss or not. I was just looking through the bestiary and just completely forgot that he existed. Beyond soldiers and scientists, Partners in Time starts introducing Shroops that feel like they're just supposed to be there to really flesh out all of the different Shroops that there are. There's Shroobsworth, who is obviously supposed to be like Toadsworth. There's Tashruba. There's another one I think is considered a boss, but I just wanted to give him a mention. Shroom bombs are a perfect example of Partners in Time's design philosophy. Take something familiar and just shroobify it. At a glance, it's a bomb, but then you notice the UFO attached to it. And then that escalation continues with lethal bombs, which feels like Nintendo intentionally labeling an enemy as dangerous. In a series full of silly names, calling something lethal is kind of unexpected if we're being honest. Spinies are already annoying, but Partners in Time decided to make them worse by turning them into spiny Shroopas, genetically altered by alien tech. They're tougher, meaner, and more aggressive than normal Spinies, and they exist purely to show how far the Shroops are willing to go in corrupting the life here. But like most enemies in this game, once the invasion ends, these things vanish completely. Lakitu is such a simple idea that it's shocking it never returned. What if Lakitu had a UFO? And also, this name just reminds me of Zubumafu. I don't know if anyone else felt that way. But like the name suggests, instead of a cloud, Lakitu pilots a flying saucer and just fully leans into the aesthetic of this game. Like, it would have been really fun to have something like this in Super Mario Galaxy or something. Shroids are one of the deepest cuts in the entire Mario and Luigi series. Besides sounding like Metroid but not actually being like a Metroid, these guys are actually pretty strong. Nothing too crazy about them, they're just basically robotic versions of Shroobs. Late in the game, Partners in Time introduces Snooze Orbs, which are large mechanical spheres that inflict sleep. Since they are positioned at the end of the game, you can expect that they are going to be more difficult and have some frustration. They feel like more of a dungeon hazard than a character, and that's kind of why they stand out. Like, I mean, their entire purpose is just to make you sleep. Getting even weirder, there's the RC Shroober. You find these in Yube's Belly, and not too much more to say about them, other than they're yet another Shroob variant. And now for a non-Shroob enemy, in the past version of Yoshi's Island, the game introduces Coconutters, and they're spear-wielding jungle enemies that throw coconuts at you. They're easy to forget because they're locked to a single time period in a single area, but they're definitely an interesting Mario and Luigi enemy. Then there's also the red Coconutter, which you'll find in Thwomp Volcano. Sniffaro is one of those enemies that exists because the developers just wanted to have that desert theme. It's just a Sniff dressed as a pharaoh, like that's it. And it's another example of one of those enemies that doesn't need to keep showing up and doesn't need to have any crazy designs, but just gives the game so much more personality, and it's one of the reasons I just got so upset when Nintendo just moved away from this direction of just having these unique enemies. Skelekeys are skeletal pokies, which are just animated stacks of bones wandering around the desert. These are extremely context specific, but still I feel like this could come back in another desert area. Partners in Time decides that when you get to the Thwomp Volcano area, it's clear the developers had a lot of fun with this. Because here, Thwomps can walk, and the result is Thwacks. Thwacks are Thwomp faces with legs, and yeah, that's kind of a tongue twister. Thwack totems are stacked Thwacks acting as a single enemy. Wonder Thwacks are faster, stronger variants. Also, can we just talk about the music here? I love the Thwomp Volcano theme. Coupelians are chameleon-like Koopas that can turn invisible, which is another clever idea. The gold Coupelian is even rarer and reinforces how much Partners in Time time, like hiding obscure enemies most players barely noticed. Once again, it's a cool idea, but just one game and then it was gone. Love bubbles and soul bubbles are floating ghost-like enemies that inflict emotional or status-based effects. Of course, there's been lava bubbles before and even the ice versions of them, but having emotional versions of them was definitely an interesting idea. Hand fake is one of the most unsettling enemies in the entire series. It's just a hand that comes out of the ground that just holds up signs of other characters. And then there's also Narantulas, which have a few different designs, and depending on who you ask, they may feel threatening as well. Another weird enemy here is piranha planets, which are what they sound like. Piranha plants made to look like planets. I mean, Nintendo really loved this theme here. And that's the Partners in Time enemies. Like, there's so many versions of the Shroobs, and that kind of overshadows the other unique enemies here. I think I prefer some of Superstar Saga's bizarre and forgotten enemies, but I still really like Partners in Time. Bowser's Inside Story is the point where the Mario and Luigi series fully commits to doing things no other Mario game would even attempt. The premise alone is ridiculous, with Mario and Luigi spending half the game inside Bowser's body, so as you can imagine, the developers took full advantage of enemy design here. Early on inside Bowser's body, Mario and Luigi encounter Goombools, which are essentially Goombas reimagined as living cells. They're these squishy, organic-looking creatures that communicate they're basically like functioning organisms inside Bowser, if that makes sense. They're very weak enemies, like they're your typical starter enemies that are like Goombas. Of course, like any Mario RPG, there's gonna be other new Goombas here, like there's Chuboombas, which are just massive, bloated Goomba-like creatures, and they also carry lollipops. Moving forward, there's some other weird enemies, some are found in Bowser's castle. There's Sniffle Thwomps, which are like regular Thwomps, but just have the sniffles, as you can imagine. There's News, which are just these chicken-like enemies that you can find in the caverns. They're not particularly threatening mechanically, but they're just your typical random Mario and Luigi enemy. As you move deeper inside Bowser, the enemies start representing bodily health problems. Calorites are like living flames that inhabit Bowser's stomach, and they act as the literal embodiment of burning calories. There's the Cholesterol, which, as you could imagine, is some sort of cholesterol enemy. And of course, these enemies are not ones that are used very much. They're there to serve a very specific purpose. Bowser's body has a lot more in the strange ecosystem. There's air cheeps, which are airborne fish enemies that float through Bowser's internal airways, basically functioning like Cheep Cheeps adapted to survive inside a body rather than underwater. They're easy to forget by name, but they're important just for really selling the feel of this game. Dried bloopers are even stranger. They're shriveled, dehydrated blooper enemies found inside Bowser, warped into something brittle and unsettling. Seeing a traditionally aquatic enemy reduced to just a dried out internal hazard is definitely something in a Mario game, I guess. I don't really know how to describe it. Some enemies inside Bowser aren't meant to represent illnesses so much as structure. Bone Thwomps are skeletal versions of Thwomps found inside Bowser's body, stripped down to their bones and repurposed as internal obstacles. Stonks serve a similar role. These enemies act as like living obstructions inside Bowser, and have this weird purple look to them. But some of the most effective internal enemies aren't dangerous because of raw damage, but they still have interesting designs. There's enemies like air naps, which remind me of like the sun from Paper Mario. There's the different versions of the pep enemies with defense, speed, and health. And this is a concept I'd love to see in another Mario game. Then as you progress through the game, enemies inside them start to feel more aggressive and reactive. There's proto-batters, Plops, spike blops, tenderlings, all just very odd enemies that are very much products of their environment. And there's plenty of other enemies here that I just want to quickly mention. Like there's a bubble blooper, there's Treevils, which are what you'd expect they are. They're trees. There's the Treevil without berry and the Treevil with berry. There's Trasher, which I believe actually originated in Super Mario RPG, and it's literally just a treasure chest. There's Leaf Guys, who are Shy Guys with leaves. There's Bifidus, who you can find in the Nerve Cluster. There's Fliffit, who reminds me of that one Cuphead flower enemy. There's Lakitu King here, who is literally just a Lakitu with a crown. There's Chain Chaffles. There's other support enemies called Beta Cretins. There's Colbits. There's Chumbas. There's Beehos, Moffle Mole, Croffle, Glam Lakitu, Bork, Drillbit Crabs, Pendrills, Skutlets, Sockops, Sneeds, Fawful Guys, which are Shy Guys mixed with Fawfles. There's Naps. There's Junker Cans, Alarm Bombs. There's Naplocks, and then there's dark versions of a lot of enemies in the game. So I know I kind of went through a lot of these fast just because there's so many enemies in this game, and a lot of them you only see a couple times. A lot of them aren't too interesting, but still have cool designs, and I did just want to go over all of them. Now on to Mario Luigi Dream Team, which has a lot more normal enemies just in dream varieties, but there's of course a lot of other new enemies here in the real world. This was really the last Mario and Luigi game for a while that actually gave us truly unique enemies. After this, even beyond Mario and Luigi, in the Paper Mario series too, there really wasn't much new. So let's start with the Goomba enemy of this game, the Gromba. There's really not much here, like it's just a regular Goomba looking enemy with earthy features. There is also the Dromba, which is just a stronger version of it. You'll see these a lot throughout the game. Then for some other enemies that are pretty common, you'll see Storch, Blochula, Capnap, Thorbs, Flibbies. So these are all enemies I could see coming back. Like they're not heavily themed towards anything in Dream Team. They kind of have basic enemy designs, and to my knowledge these are all original to to Dream Team and have not returned. Then going into the Dream World, we have some Dream enemies like Dreamcap Captain and Propellion. Though Propellion I really remember, the Dreamcaps are kind of like the Goombas of the Dream World in a way, and then the Propellion is one of your typical aerial enemies. Now let's go back to the real world where we have the Flounder Phallages. These come in different colors. There's red, green, purple, and white, and they were a version of underground enemies that we've seen before in the Mario and Luigi series. Now in the desert area here, I actually really like some of these designs. Like we have sand dunes, we have cacacs, however they're pronounced, and they're supposed to be like cacti, and these are just really cool designs. It's things like this that just made me miss the older Mario and Luigi games after, like, once Paper Jam came out. Because something as basic as this that isn't even that crazy of a design is just so much different than just having your typical Shy Guys, Goombas, and Paratroopas in the desert. Now let's go back to the Dream World. So there's a dreamy version of the sand dune, which is very similar. It actually is weaker, but this time it's purple. There's La-Bombs, which do not look anything like Bob-Bombs. Skip Drills, which you won't believe this, but they're drills. And then as you progress and go back to the real world, there's Hermite Crabs, which I thought were in the series before. There's been a lot of other crab enemies in the Mario series, but apparently these are unique to Dream Team. You'll find these in Wakeport, and then in Dreamy Wakeport, there's Coco Knights, there's Tick Squawks, there's Sorrow Fists, which are like these bird kind of bomb enemies, and they're actually fairly strong. And these don't really seem like dreamy enemies. Like, these seem like enemies that could be anywhere in the Mario world. Once you get to Mount Pajama, there's a lot of unique enemies. You got the Monolith, which is just this rock enemy that carries rocks. There's Grumbell, which I love the design of, obviously supposed to be a dumbbell. These enemies are pretty strong with 100 power and 127 defense. Then we have more Flibbies with Flibby R. One of my favorite enemies from this game, Pillowdactyl. Besides having just a very funny name, these guys are no joke. They have 318 HP and almost 200 defense. And also, most of the time they are going to drop Ultra Candy. And then lastly, for the real world here, we have Block Monolith, which is just a different version of the other Monolith. Once you get into Dreamy Mount Pajama, you have Chisel, Magmed, Isad, La-Bomb R. And again, these enemies don't seem like they have to be exclusive to the Dream World, but I believe they are. There's a reason why this is one of my favorite areas in the game. There's just so many unique enemies here. Once you arrive at Driftwood Shore, you're gonna see some familiar faces. This is the Durapearl, but then a lot of enemies here are pretty basic. Like, you have your Goombas here, you have your Shy Guys, you have your Spinies. I don't think we see any more unique enemies in this area until you actually go to the Dream World, where you see the Bloop Urn, which is just a blooper urn, if you could believe. There's Dreamcap R, Dreamcap Captain R, so nothing too crazy here, just some small variations. And then we have Dream Steep, where you have the Dark Block, which is what it sounds like, it's a dark block. We also see gold beanies come back from Superstar Saga, and I believe they actually are throughout the game. The viruses from Superstar Saga and Dr. Mario come back. We get bandits back here, which have been in the series before. We see Krubbish and Coco Knight R. So a lot of these enemies aren't brand new, or they're just variations. But then we get the Eye Pillow, which of course is unique to this game. This is the point of the game, like once you get to Sumnam Woods, where you start to see some more unique enemies again, like the Pelicrump, which is this giant bird. Spritz Bloom, which is just another variation of a piranha plant, and Tasman, which of course is just an Antasma support enemy, along with Antasmunchies. Then there's also dreamy versions of other existing Mario characters, like in Neo Bowser Castle, like Dreamy Babam, Dreamy Goomba, Dreamy Paratroopa, Dreamy Shy Guy. There's Antasma X, Mini Pilloid X's, Antasmunchie X. And that's it for Mario & Luigi Dream Team. So a lot of these enemies don't have any crazy designs. Like, I don't think these are the most unique designs in the series. But this would be the last time for a while where the dev team would actually experiment in making these areas feel distinct by having unique enemies that we either haven't seen before or have rarely seen. And of course the Dream enemies, which will likely never come back, but really did a lot to make the Dream sections more fun. Now moving on to Paper Jam, so there's not a lot to say here because I don't want to just read off every single paper version of an enemy. This was the era where Nintendo just was refusing to have any new type of enemy. Like, if you go to the bestiary of Paper Jam, literally all you're going to see is existing Mario enemies that we've seen countless times. Like, I don't know if there's a single unique enemy in this game outside of Paper ones. And it's really sad because this game really has no distinct feel. Like, imagine what they could have done. Imagine even if they brought back enemies from Paper Mario. Like, Super Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door especially had so many unique enemies they could have had here just to give the game a better feel, and they just did not do that. So there's really not anything to say for Paper Jam, I don't think. At most, I think it's just the variations, but no truly unique enemies here. And then finally we arrive at Mario & Luigi Brothership, which finally released after 9 years of no brand new Mario & Luigi games. Now the enemies here are not my favorite, but we did get a lot of new bad guys here, which was a good sign. Your basic Goomba type enemy in this game is Seedle. These are very easy to defeat, and you'll see them throughout the game. Nothing special here, but it's good to at least see Nintendo changing up the regular base enemy. There's Guard Arms here, which very much feel like Brothership enemies. You'll find them on Rumla Island, and I believe they only appear in scripted battles. When I think Brothership, one of the enemies I think of is the Invisilizard. They're basically just chameleons, and what's cool about them is that their stats are actually determined when the player visits Rainforest Island, so it can change. And then the same goes for parachutes, which have that same guarding kind of feel of the Seedles, but they do fly. Also, something I want to mention is that this is really where a lot of enemy stats start changing dynamically based on your stats when you visit islands, and that's something I actually really did like about Brothership. Moving on to Twisty Island, there's Sorbors and Big Sorbors, which are just these pig enemies. There's Bumbleshoots, which are basically just parachutes but blue and a little stronger. Moving on to Floral Island, because this game obviously has a big kind of garden theme. There's Seedle R's and then Hydro Seedles, which are again just stronger versions of Seedles. We have Spikeleys, which are enemies I wouldn't be surprised if we see again. They're pretty basic designs and could work in a lot of different environments in this series. One of the most annoying enemies in the game is Snaptors. These just fly around and can be difficult to kill. They also are part of boss fights. There's Drillbees, which are basically narwhals in the dirt. Then moving on to Lotacoins Island, which is a very memorable part of the game. It has some enemies that fit Brothership's other theme of just having electricity, because there's a Spike Zop Troopa and Helmet Zoc Trooper, which have that very electric feel. Once you get past that, you get to All Sand Island, you'll remember these guys, Shark Bones, which apparently have 1100 HP. I didn't even think you could kill them. And you're not going to fight these because they'll kill you almost immediately. They exist to be an obstacle that you have to get around. Staying on this island, there's the Showerfish, which I mean, does that need words? Invisilizard R's also make an appearance here. Zokrang Troopers are more electrical enemies that you'll see later in the game. And at this point, there's a lot of islands that have maybe just one unique enemy. Like for example, there's the Crowed R, which you'll find on Marigo Island. And these are kind of like the tree enemies from Bowser's Inside Story. On Boldfish Island, you'll see Foot Flies, which just has a funny design. Heat Freeze Island gives us a few new ones. We'll see Ringzop Trooper, Curl Up, which is basically like this armadillo. And then there's also Gloam Curl Up. Now when you get to Slipping Glide Island, there's a lot of basic enemies here. Like you have the Ice Heads are back, you have more Drillbees, you have Spikes, you have Goombas. Same thing for Scorching Island. Magmads are back, and then there's also the Gloam Magmad. You have Palookas here, which I don't believe I've mentioned before. And then there's Gloam versions of some enemies like Gloam Piranha Plants. I'm not going to go over every single Gloam enemy in the game, but there are a lot of them. Then we don't really see any new enemies until Off-Andon Island, where we see Milton. He can be in stacks of 3, 4, or 5. This is basically like a much stronger version of a Pokey. Then after this, it's a while until we see some new enemies. There's the Jedzok Trooper, which is just another version of these enemies. Later on, there's Conductor Cups, which are just support enemies meant to go with the Great Conductor. And then once again, it's a while in Bestiary until we see new enemies. Like there's the Weeping Trooper, which you find in Solitary. There's Reclusive, which is obviously a similar name to Reclusa. There's Seedlusa, where there's two versions of. There's the version that's not bloomed and the version that's bloomed, which is infinitely stronger, has over 3000 HP. And there it is, all the bizarre and forgotten enemies of the Mario and Luigi series. So there are a lot here. For the first couple games in the series, I tried going more detail into each game, but then I realized this video would be like an hour long, and I just wanted to try to go through all of them and just talk about some of them, just give interesting facts if there were some. You could really see how the series has progressed over time. Like Superstar Saga really did a lot with like the whole Bean theme, Partners in Time did a lot with the Alien theme, Bowser's Inside Story did a lot with the Bowser's Body theme, Dream Team did a lot with dreamy enemies, but then from there I feel like the series kind of fell off. Like even Dream Team I feel like wasn't the same. Paper Jam, like I said, there was almost no new enemies, and I don't even think there were any completely new ones. And Brothership was a step in the right direction, but the enemies here didn't really stand out to me the same way that earlier entries did. One of my favorite things about Mario RPGs is all the characters that are meant to exist in just one specific area or just brand new here, and I really hope that we get future Mario and Luigi games that really take advantage of this. Now, if you want to see me talk about bizarre and forgotten enemies of Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario, I have videos on that, so be sure to check those out. If you're a big Mario RPG fan, I think you'll really like my Discord because we talk a lot about that there, so consider joining that, link in the description. And also be sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching Domainy, and I'll see you next time.